Hello, very beautiful community. We live in the age of post-truth populism. Unless we report post-truth populism properly via our media, we're going to lose to it. So we're going to do a little sit-around sort of conversation via an example. We're going to react to a video about what it means for journalism to scrutinize post-truth authoritarian politicians in Western democracies. So specifically, the story we'll look at is this. White House is attacking the BBC for being 100% fake news, following BBC Panorama splicing together, this happened a while ago, two clips of Trump, where in fact he said the things 53 minutes apart, but they put it together as though he said them consecutively. So we're going to watch an attack on the BBC from the Telegraph now and react. But before, we've got to have a tiny bit of background. So there is a guy called Michael Prescott who used to be a Murdoch newspaper journalist that became a PR executive, and he got hired as a consultant by the BBC's editorial guidelines and standards committee. Now, we've got to be careful when we talk about this, because one of the biggest challenges for an organization like the BBC is actually the politicization of its policing. So, for instance, you look at Robbie Gibb there, for example, Sir Robbie Gibb, who was appointed by the post-truth populist Boris Johnson. And he's a guy who ran led a mystery consortium that acquired the Jewish Chronicle. So this is not going to be a guy who's necessarily going to be objective on the BBC's Israel coverage. So one of the issues we've got here that we can't discuss today, because we want to focus just on how you correctly report on post-truth populists in principle. We don't want to get too much into BBC specific stories or any news organization specific stories. But the point is that much of the conversation that we're having today is going to boil down to what we won't have a chance to discuss, which is the politicization of the governing bodies of these organizations. Now, Michael Prescott wrote a dossier that then got leaked. And it made several claims, none of which we'll address in detail. But there were claims about Trump coverage, which we will look at. There were claims about Kamala Harris coverage, which we won't look at. There were claims about BBC Arabic Middle East coverage, where there indeed are some issues. There were claims about the BBC going too far with ideological language in its LGBTQ plus desk and so on. But we're going to simply look at the Trump quote being spliced. So we've got Gordon Rayner, who is the associate editor of the Telegraph, who'd been running this story. Let's watch.
Now, I was taken aback by evidence that the BBC's flagship documentary programme, Panorama, had doctored a speech by Donald Trump to make it appear that he'd said something he hadn't.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we fight. We fight like hell.
After an entire week of claims about BBC bias, censorship and fakery, we still await any form of apology from the broadcaster's leadership, or even an acknowledgement that there's anything wrong. Their silence proves there's a serious problem.
Okay. So I really don't like this, but I also think there is a point here. So let's break this down. By the way, the week of claims and allegations and discussions is, the emphasis of that is a self-indulgent emphasis, because it's just been the Telegraph attacking the BBC. So this is bad agenda journalism by the Telegraph, but there's also a point there. So how shall we think about this? Well, I think we need to look at the quote in more detail. Let me see if we can find it in writing there. So here's starting with the pink bit at the top, what was shown on video. We're going to walk down to the Capitol and I'll be with you, and we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. In reality, here is the first part of what Trump said. We're going to walk down to the Capitol and I'll be with you. And the second part, we fight, came 54 minutes later. So in full, the first bit that they didn't properly show is, we're going to walk down to the Capitol, I'll be with you. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. Now, the issue is, looking at this quote, that there is something that has been got wrong here, but there is something that hasn't been got wrong here. Multiple official bodies found that Trump did incite the insurrection. And here is where we don't even need to look at the rest of the Telegraph's reporting. We can just tell Gordon that he's full of beans. Because the manipulation in his video is much worse than the BBC manipulation, which is bad, which he's criticizing. In fact, there's an element of post-truth in Gordon's little clip there, because he is being extremely biased in one regard, which is kept off the page, and then accusing the BBC of bias in a regard that is kept on the page. But you've got to keep the two together. So the impression you get from his clip is that Trump was not inciting an insurrection, and that the BBC made it out that he was. But what in fact the Panorama program did is correctly report that Trump was inciting an insurrection, but get the facts wrong in their assemblage of the evidence for it. And part of the reason I suspect this happened is that Trump's post-truth populist, and individual journalists and individual producers, individual directors, individual editors, and institutions don't know how to report on that. If you're looking at a hour-long speech and you're hearing, go peacefully and be very beautiful, fight, 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 be very, very, very peaceful, tremendously peaceful, beautifully, pretty much, fight, fight, be perfectly peaceful. So what do you do with that? And that throws people. And so there is a temptation to somehow not have to face the full journalistic difficulty of what it means to deal with a speech like that. Because a speech by a known post-truth politician who is, let's say, unlovely and deceptive is much easier to deal with. There's a consistent line of deception there. But if you've got a sort of a porridge of ill-assorted contradictory claims deliberately thrown out there, with the practical aim of trying to destabilize people's relationship with truth, as well as getting a clear message in, across that you've got to go somewhere and do something. How do you report that? It's very, very difficult. And over and above this difficulty, there's the inherent defensive position of people in the organization like the BBC, which gets attacked sometimes wrongly, sometimes rightly, mostly wrongly, but often rightly, from all sides. And there's therefore kind of a fortress mentality that develops inside these organizations. Oh my word, we're going to get this wrong, whatever we do. Why don't we try to do something that has the least chance of generating some kind of really scary pushback. Now, I'm not saying anybody sort of aims at that consciously, but I'm saying that is going to play a subconscious role when you are doing a program, when you're doing reporting. And that also can sort of, tilt people in a certain direction. With Trump, it's actually possible that people feel that the safest thing to do is sometimes to report something against his credit, because it's obviously he's so lamentable and catastrophic. So why don't we just gently brush over something there to make the point clearer? But you can also go the other way with Trump. You can also do what mostly organizations like the BBC do, which is that they equalize. And clearly, one of the things that Michael Prescott was pushing for, probably wrongly, is more equalization between Kamala Harris and Trump in the BBC reporting. But I don't want the BBC to equalize them, because they're not equal. Because Kamala Harris is a politician unsuited for power, because she is a centrist technocrat in an age when centrist technocracies is a poison for our politics. In our controversial age, I shouldn't use language like that. So it's toxic, right? It's unconstructive for our politics. But she's a pro-institutional politician. She's not out to wreck U.S. democracy. So I don't want an equivalence between Kamala Harris and Trump. And obviously, if you're pro-institutional and the only choice you've got is Kamala or Trump, unless you've got some very extravagant story about why it should go otherwise, you're gonna prefer Kamala Harris. So there's also this risk of equalization. Now, what should they have done here? Now, I think that the big picture they didn't misrepresent with this splicing, because Trump was inciting the insurrection. That's how they reported it. But I do think that the way he was inciting the insurrection got misrepresented by the Panorama program that spliced this together. I think what they did is a no-no. It's not acceptable. The viewer needs to see that there is a gap between these two quotes, because we're talking about the most powerful, or one of the two most powerful people on earth, leader of China, leader of the United States, saying something. You've got to be very careful about how you report them. And if there is a 53-minute gap there, you've got to let the viewer know that there is indeed that gap between the two spliced quotes. You've got to make it very, very clear to the reader, to the viewer. This is tricky, because how do you then convey the fact that he's actually saying and not saying something, and that the point of his speech is to say and not say something? Well, one way is to get in a little bit of expert commentary, which narrates the fact that the very point of what Trump is saying is fight, 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 go peacefully, fight peacefully, fight very peacefully, and be very peaceful, and definitely don't fight, but also fight. So you've got to convey that, but you've got to take a little bit of time, and you're going to respect your audience by giving them the correct information about the way the incitation occurred. So if we are summarizing the BBC error there, it's that they didn't report accurately. Instead, they reported manipulatively and inappropriately on the way Trump incited the insurrection. That's to say, he incited it in a more post-truth way than the BBC report suggested. So this conversation doesn't settle anything. It's just rotation of us talking about the same thing over and over. But it's a very important topic for us to keep ventilating. So I'm grateful you got through this with me. Thank you so much, and let's live.